Hey everyone, it's Blake. Welcome in to today's episode of the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we welcome back a 411 on Wrestling Podcast regular, and that is 411 Steve Cook. Of course, Steve used to be a regular guest host here on the podcast with Larry Zonka, and we're excited to welcome Steve back to the podcast here as we had a great discussion on a variety of topics in the world of professional wrestling. We talked about the passing of Road Warrior Animal. We talked a bit about Ring of Honor. Lots of things going on in WWE with Clash of Champions set for Sunday. The G1 is off to a great start. AEW has had some great shows here as of late, so we really touched on a lot of different things in professional wrestling. So hopefully, if you're a fan of any of those different companies, there's a little bit of something in here for you on this episode of the podcast. So let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with 411's Steve Cook. As promised, I am excited to welcome in the one and only Steve Cook from 411 Mania, and as I said in the intro, Steve, you are the regular here on the podcast. You've been on a lot more episodes than I have, but I really appreciate you doing this.
I was on many different episodes of the 411 on Wrestling with Larry Zonka back in the day. It was always a good time. I know most recently we'd been doing the Wednesday night recaps for Dynamite and for NXT, and I know people were a fan of those, and all the stuff we did back in the day as well. But life throws curveballs at us, and we handle them the best we can. And I'm doing all the stuff that I'm doing, and Blake's here to continue the 411 on Wrestling. So, yeah. Like I told him earlier, I wish him great luck with it, and I might come in from time to time, but like I kind of alluded to, I am somewhat of a busy man. So.
Yep, you are for sure, and we will, of course, link to all your stuff over at 411 Mania in the show notes for this. And I guess, Steve, we have to start. We're recording this on Thursday. Road Warrior Animal passed away on Wednesday. Hard to believe. I mean, he was 60 years old, and it's just one of those where I think you look at the number, and it's just, man... we think about, which we've talked about this unfortunately too many times in wrestling, all the people we lose, at an age like that, which again, I know it's 60, but it's not that old. And I think we look at someone like him that tag team in general, and actually, Steve, I was reading your, recent column. You did one back in, I want to say it was mid-August. You did the top 7 tag teams of the 80s, and of course you had the Road Warriors in there, and you talked about and basically said, I pulled it up here, there hasn't been a more dominating tag team than Hawk and Animal in their prime, and I think that's a good way to put it. And unfortunately, as we said, we lose another one here in the wrestling business, and there's no doubt that Animal was certainly someone that a lot of people connected with, just that tag team in general, and hate to lose another one.
Yeah, and I've been doing a series of the top tag teams of each decade, which will finally conclude this week with the 2010s, which I believe is up on 411 as we speak. But Animal and Hawk, the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors, there was a lot of people try to be like them. There were a whole ton of imitators because that's what you did back in the 1980s. Once something got over, everybody else had to have their own version. So you had like 15 different tag teams with mohawks and face paints and long tights and big jacked up dudes. But only one team got over like the Road Warriors did, like Hawk and Animal, and their story is one. You alluded to the popularity of Hawk and Animal, and continues to this day because you remember on the last season of the Dark Side of the Ring TV show, the Legion of Doom story was one of the highlighted episodes. And me, I mean, it's probably just me, but I was very in tune with the LED story because I've followed it. I've seen the various documentaries. So I was kind of wondering, we've heard this one before, but it got one of the highest ratings that the series got so far because everybody knows Hawk and Animal. Everybody knows LOD. They were mainstream stars. They're people, if you see them on a wrestling poster, you would see, okay, those are wrestlers. Those look like badass guys. Yeah. So definitely popular team. The Iron Man theme music back in the day, they went to WWF and did pretty much the same thing. And Animal was a guy who he was never a singles guy. He was always about tag teams. He was always about other wrestlers. Even later on, when the Road Warriors had split up for a bit, he was part of a big group in WCW. He wasn't like off on his own doing his own thing. He wanted to help other people get over, and I think that's something that he was. I think that's what he was all about.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it was something where, as you just said, It seems like, and I don't know if it's just this era. I mean, we saw it in previous eras too, but it was always, okay, well, how do we split this team up? And then they go on to be single stars, or one of them does, and the other one kind of flounders. It was really never that way with those guys, as you said. I mean, they were a true tag team, and you always thought of them together, and you always knew what they would be able to accomplish together. And I think another thing was just that look, man. It was just, you looked at them, as you said, like you look at them, they're badasses. Like, that's exactly the first thing you thought. They look like wrestlers. I mean, you saw the way, they were built, and just, goodness, that they were kind of that quintessential team, to where if you looked at it and say, okay, that's a professional wrestler, given their look, like you said, the theme music with the Iron Man and everything. That they just felt like that tag team that sort of defined professional wrestling, just because of their entire makeup and how they were presented to.
Definitely quintessential 1980s, but also timeless in a way, because you watch their stuff today and it still holds up.
Yeah, it does for sure, and absolutely. And of course, if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably watched the Road Warriors many times, but this is a good time to go back and check out some of their best matches, because there's a lot of them, and definitely a good time to go down memory lane and check out some of that stuff after the passing of Road Warrior Animal. But Steve, no easy way to transition, but we'll look into some other stuff here in the world of professional wrestling. Let's start actually with Ring of Honor, because I know you've been doing the recent show reviews and everything. You've been watching Ring of Honor and seeing, we've talked a lot during this pandemic era. Of course, everybody's look at different promotions, how they've handled it. Ring of Honor is another one that's kind of one that came back and has kind of been going strong here since. We have the Pure Tournament going on now. What have been your thoughts on Ring of Honor here as of late?
Yeah, they took a long time off during the quarantine era, being what it is, and they're working, trying to figure out the right way to come back at the right time. And I think they found the right way with this Pure title tournament. Now, I'm one of those guys who watched Ring of Honor back in the day, but then kind of got away from it once it became like the Sinclair era, and they did some stuff that wasn't quite on the same level. So I kind of grew out of it or whatever. But after Larry passed and some slots were open on the site, one thing I could do was do the ROH TV recap, because it was on at a time where I'm usually home. So I did a bunch of those shows and was waiting for them to come up with something new, because I was getting a little antsy, like, come on guys, we gotta do something here. And they came up with something that I'm a big fan of, because I remember back in the day, the Pure Championship was one of those things that made Ring of Honor stand out from the rest. I remember going to shows when Nigel McGuinness was the Pure champion, and he really elevated that championship. And unfortunately, I think he elevated it too much to the point where they thought nobody else could follow him, because they got rid of it pretty much right after he gave it up. So it took a long time off, but some people have been asking for it. Jonathan Gresham, I know, is a big fan of the style, big fan of the concept. I know he wants to make it a focal point of ROH, and he is part of this tournament. And if you take a look at the brackets and whatnot, yeah, Gresham's obviously one of the favorites. Jay Lethal's one of the favorites over on the other side. I'd be more surprised if they didn't be in the finals than anything else. But some other interesting names in the tournament too. You got Matt Sydal, who had a pretty interesting week, because he was on the ROH show against Delirious, and then he pops up on the late night Dynamite against Sean Spears. So main events in ROH and AEW, pretty impressive for Matt, and he's going up against Gresham next round, so we'll see how that goes for him. If you're listening to this, you probably know better than I do about David Finlay over in New Japan. But talking a fourth-generation wrestler here, son of Fit, and from what I've seen, David Finlay looks like a chip off the old block, and he'll be facing Lethal next round, so that's going to be interesting to follow. And then we got some other matches and whatnot coming up. Looking forward to seeing my boy Fred Yehai taking on Silas Young this week. That should be pretty good. And so that's going to be continuing on here for the next few weeks. And like I said, I'd kind of gotten away from ROH. It seemed like it kind of fallen off to me. But I got to tell you, like the last couple weeks here, I'm getting back into it. I think the ROH has kind of figured out what their niche is, their style, what they can do. And I guess the good thing about the pandemic is you can take some time off to sit back and think about what you want your company to be going forward. And I think ROH has put a lot of thought into that.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up. I was thinking about it too, and it's, for someone like WWE, as we've seen, I mean, they've just kept chugging along and they haven't stopped. And you almost look at a company like ROH, and I agree with you, like watching their recent television, like it does. It feels like something where, okay, we know this promotion took this much time off. Now you're watching it, it feels like that restart. It feels fresh. They have this tournament going on. It does. It feels like, even if I guess you can say there are positives within this pandemic, something for like ROH to be able to take that time off, as you said, sort of regroup and move forward with fresh ideas, with sort of a better understanding of where you want to go forward without that pressure of every single week having to be on the road, do this or that. It does feel like something that they've been able to use to their advantage, as we said, with the momentum that they do have right now.
Which is kind of the opposite, honestly, of what we've seen. To be, not to just completely throw WWE under the bus,
Right.
but I think it seems like Raw most weeks it looks like a company that does not really know what they're doing. Doesn't know what style they want to go. Doesn't know what direction they're going. I mean, I know we're going to mention the Retribution thing. Perfect example of a company that doesn't know what the heck they're doing.
Yes, and let's just go ahead and move to that. Why not, right? We were going to get to it at some point. We might as well talk about it now. That is a good way to transition. But I guess the first question, Steve, I have to ask you is, if you had to pick between one of the three, if WWE hired you tomorrow and said, all right, we're going to give you one of these three names, Mace, T-Bar, or Slapjack, which one are you choosing?
Well, you know what, man? I was a big Stevie Ray fan back in the day.
Yeah, okay.
Suckers gots to know. Got the yaks going on. So I think I'd have to go with Slapjack, man. Oh, man.
It's pretty good. I don't know. I was torn between T-Bar and Slapjack, so I guess I'll be T-Bar, and then we'll find a Mace somewhere. But boy, I don't even know what to say, because, like you said, it is something where because, for example, like in AEW, which, I mean, they've had some issues, which, again, we're recording here on Thursday, and the COVID-19 testing and all that. They've had some recent positive. Lance Archer, Ben Carter, who was kind of the big star on Tuesday night with AEW Dark and on the Late Night Dynamite, he's tested positive. But aside from that, if you just look at the show quality, AEW's done a really good job lately, and they have a lot of momentum. A lot of people are praising what they've been doing, but I don't think that's necessarily, it's one of those, AEW's great, WWE's bad. It's just, what are you getting from these two promotions? And when you compare what you're seeing in terms of storytelling and everything, it does feel different. And I think it's just, man, you look at this Retribution storyline, it's one where, as you said, I don't know from the very beginning, if you go back to when it first started to where it is now, I don't see any sort of situation where I'm looking at it and saying, okay, I understand why they did this or why they did that, or where this is even going. It just feels like something that has been completely thrown together, and now we add all these names into the mix. You have these people that are basically being called up, and we still have no idea what the whole thought process is behind this. It's just very frustrating, because I don't even know. I don't even know what it's supposed to be, I guess, is the best way to put it.
I mean, the one positive we can take away from is that Mia Yim's on TV, right?
Yes, that's right.
I mean, that's the one thing. That's the one thing I'm saying. Mercedes Martinez too. God bless them. They're good. They're good folks. It's nice to see him get a shot. And nothing against any of the individual talents, really. They're kind of up against it. It's one of those situations where you put a square peg into a round hole, and you try and do something, and they're all trying the best they can, I'm sure. But yeah, it's tough to say, and I'm not sure where they're going with it, and I don't know if they're sure. Although I did hear, I don't know if it's a rumor, or I don't know if it's a message board gossip thing or whatnot, that we might be able to combine two of our stories that are kind of struggling right now, which I don't know if that'd be a good answer for it or not, where I've heard that there's the potential that Keith Lee might end up being involved in this whole thing. It might be the leader of Retribution, which would also make no sense. But I guess you could combine all your stories that are struggling into one, so there you go.
Yeah, you could do that, and he's been another one. I think back to Keith Lee, and it's like, it wasn't that long ago where we were talking about Payback, and I thought Payback was actually a pretty good show in terms of Keith Lee comes in, he gets the win against Randy Orton. You had some other good stuff on that show. But now it's like you've had these matches in recent weeks where it's been Keith Lee, Drew McIntyre. You don't get finishes. You know you're not getting a finish from these matches. And then that sort of takes away the anticipation for a future match between two guys like that. And it's another example to me of guys who get called up, and we're talking about Retribution, which you can throw this into the mix, which, I mean, I guess they had a better idea for Retribution in terms of where they were going, even though it's something that hasn't necessarily been reacted to with positive, momentum. But I feel like sometimes they call people up to call them up, and you just don't have that long term idea of where you want these guys to go. And it does feel like, with Keith Lee, as we said with Retribution, it just feels like we're seeing way too many situations of this now. And look, they've hit on some of these, but for some reason, it just feels like they call up some of these people from NXT, and it's like we're calling them up to call them up. We want them on the main roster, but once they get there, it's where are they going, and it doesn't seem like they really know.
And the thing with Keith Lee is that I have putting him in there if Drew McIntyre and Randy Orton is not something I have a problem with.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty cool. I think that that big he beat Orton in 6 minutes on Payback. That is pretty good stuff. But everything kind of surrounding that general idea has been kind of a miss. And even with the presentation of Keith Lee, where the music, the music has been a largely talked about thing where they just completely neutered his music. They're turned to some kind of stock music or whatever they're doing, and then you had the wardrobe. How you they brought this guy up and they have no idea how to dress him.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't understand all that myself. And Retribution also had some wardrobe issues as well. So it just feels like they do, like you said, they're calling these people up just to call them up and getting them spots. But beyond that part of it, there's no real plan.
Yeah, that makes it hard, I think, for people to connect and to follow it if there's just no sort of long-term plan and you have the week-to-week. But again, this is not anything new. I think with WWE, this has been one of the common frustrations for people over the past, I don't know how many years now, just that sometimes it's just a week-to-week thing and you don't really know where things are going. But what we do know, Steve, is that Clash of Champions is going to be on Sunday, and it's a full card. I guess if you look at this card, is there anything to you that particularly stands out? I mean, I've said on the podcast here the past couple episodes, I've really loved the Roman Reigns thing, which I don't think that's a surprise in terms of his new direction. Bayley and Sasha, I think, have been the highlights of this entire pandemic era, if you want to say, just because of what they've been able to do and now where they're headed with their feud. Everything else, to me, just kind of feels there. Even the Drew McIntyre, Randy Orton thing, I mean, it's good, but I don't know if it's to that level. Maybe it was even a month or two ago just because of what all has gone into it since then. But anything in particular you're most excited about heading into this show?
I mean, there's some stuff on this card that looks like it should be pretty good. And I will give a special shout out there to we got a triple threat ladder match, man, with Jeff Hardy, AJ Styles, Sami Zayn. Hey, if you're gonna tell me you're gonna put those three guys in a ladder match, I'm sold. I'm good. Yep. I mean, I don't care what the story is.
Right, exactly.
You could have Sami Zayn out there in a dress or whatever. You could have AJ Styles hopping up and down like chimpanzees. I don't care what they're doing. As you put that match out there, I will watch it. So, but and Sami, let's be honest, Sami Zayn is the correct and proper Intercontinental Champion. So I'm looking forward to him regaining his title there. But you mentioned Reigns and Jey Uso, and it's interesting because the thing with the Usos, I mentioned in my column I wrote today that whenever one of the Usos is injured, the other one's always off television.
Yeah,
like you never see them apart. Very rarely. When one guy gets hurt or whatever, the other one has to go away. I don't know why that's always been the case, and it's finally taken until 2020 where they figured out, oh, so Jimmy's out for like 9 months. We can put Jay on TV. That's okay. I assume that's probably only because Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman suggested it.
Yeah, that would be my guess.
That's probably the only reason it's happening, because we know that Paul Heyman always has, whenever Heyman's involved in the storyline, like personally involved, he has the creative control, which is funny because, Heyman just got fired off of Raw, but now we're going to let him do this thing on SmackDown, and it's going to be better than anything he did on Raw. So
yeah, no,
but maybe that's a Paul E thing, where maybe Paul E at this point is just better when he's personally involved in something. He wasn't involved in anything on Raw. He was writing stuff, and then be honest, I couldn't tell a difference from Paul Heyman booked Raw than anything else we've seen. So just one of those things, I guess, where probably when Paul's involved, he's more motivated, he's more in tune, and the story's been working so far. I don't see any way in hell that Jey Uso wins, but other than that, it's a pretty good story.
Do you think we're obviously playing the guessing game here? Do you think there is ever a situation within the next year, maybe 2 years, we get Roman Reigns versus The Rock at WrestleMania, because that's been something which The Rock had his video, I guess, sometime this week. He did one of his YouTube videos or something. He had a series, and of course, that was one of the things he mentioned about how it would obviously make sense for him to come back, and if he did come back, it would make sense for him to face Reigns. I guess again, we're playing the prediction game, but do you ever see that happening?
That's all due to The Rock's movie schedule.
Yep.
And I have no idea what The Rock's movie schedule is. I don't even know how COVID's affecting all this stuff as far as movies go, man. I have no idea. But it's all due to that. I'm sure The Rock would probably like to do it. I know Roman Reigns would like to do it. That'd help his profile significantly. But it's one of those things where you just have to say never. That's never say never.
Yeah.
You can't rule anything out.
Never say never. Never say never with The Undertaker coming back and wrestling another match. Never say never on something like that. So there you go.
Although if you're The Undertaker and looking at all these people, you wonder who you want to wrestle.
Yes, that's true. That's a good point.
Yeah. He's like, I wrestled AJ Styles. Okay, so what's next for me? Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like he's probably wishing he had this Roman Reigns maybe instead of the previous one, the match they had together. It would be nice to maybe have that match now. Although I don't know, it'd be different, but we'll see. So there you go. Clash of Champions is on Sunday, and obviously we'll have full coverage over at 411 Mania, so you can check that out there. All right, let's talk about some more stuff going on here around the wrestling world. Let's talk a little AEW. As we mentioned earlier, they have had the COVID-19 stuff playing into their recent TV. They had to change the 6-man tag on Wednesday's edition of Dynamite because of Lance Archer's positive test. And we mentioned Ben Carter, someone else who's come out and kind of confirmed that he is positive as well. But aside from that, I think this is a company that you certainly go back to that episode of Dynamite the previous week, which I wrote a column on. I thought it was just one of those episodes of TV that was just so good that it just made you kind of enjoy wrestling, and I think that's what we all want to do, is just enjoy it and have fun. What did you think of the parking lot fight? Because that's one that everyone has reacted to, and even Jim Ross, you heard his comments, and everyone else, Mick Foley, he was on Twitter as soon as it was over talking about just how great it was. What did you think, just of the uniqueness of that particular match?
Oh, that was tremendous. It was absolutely tremendous. Those 4 guys just went out there, beat the living hell out of each other. It was a classic parking lot style kind of fight, the kind of thing that you would see. And it's something I've been thinking of a bit lately. When you think about Tony Khan and kind of what he's inspired by in his booking, you see like he likes to do these parking lot brawls, and you see the kind of talents that he brings in, and you see at least I see a lot of heavy influence in the early days. Like the 2000s Combat Zone Wrestling. Yeah. Which is something you probably wouldn't have expected to see on mainstream television as little as a couple of years ago. But you see the kinds of names he brings in, like just you mentioned the main event last night was Jon Moxley versus Eddie Kingston, 2 former CZW champions. Yeah. So it's not surprising that it's all surprising TNT standards and practices aren't what they used to be, I guess, because I can't see WCW getting away with that parking lot brawl. I don't think getting slammed on the glass like that would have been good back in 1999 or whatever. But it's working today. TNT seems happy. Everybody seems happy, and a team like Chucky T, like Trent, those guys are outstanding. And you can't forget that week's episode of Dynamite, probably the best finish to any episode of television ever, with Trent's mom Sue flipping the bird. That was great. I don't know how you can't end a show better than that. You just, not even with Ricky Stark standing tall, and Ricky Stark standing tall is a great thing, but that's not as good as Sue flipping the bird. I'm sorry.
No, I agree, and it's funny because that's the one thing. Like, I led my column with that, and then I ended it with that. It was like that was the lasting image on what I thought was one of the better episodes of television for any company I've seen in a while. But that was the one thing that stood out, was a wrestler's mom flipping off the camera. Like, that's wrestling. Like, that just makes it so great. But I thought it was just excellent, just the presentation of that particular match. And, of course, the one thing I think AEW does pretty well, and I think that match kind of hammered it home, was, these weren't 4 guys that a lot of people looked at. I guess 5 if you throw in Orange Cassidy, although he may be at the higher point of that group. But these weren't those type of guys that you looked at and said, okay, those are your main event guys. Like, you're going to see guys that come out and every week, like, those are your main event guys. Like, we kind of label or we put whatever on some of these guys and know that they're going to be in the main event every week or they're going to be viewed as main eventers. But I think what AEW has done so well is you have so much of this young, good talent that you have guys that are able to elevate themselves to those levels to where they can in a main event like that. And I know that was a unique situation where you had, it's a parking lot match, all that other stuff. But I think that's one of the things that they do so well is that they're able to find ways to elevate anyone, no matter where people may think they're slotted on the card. I just think they do a really good job of that with not just those guys in particular, but, we've seen it with other guys as well, like Jungle Boy, all the others that are kind of those young talents that are coming up.
Especially in the pandemic era, though, you can't have the same guys in main event every single week.
Right.
You just can't, because you never know when these guys are going to disappear. And we've seen that on both shows. And with WWE, I think one of the problems for a while on SmackDown obviously was, okay, Roman Reigns isn't here. Who do we put in main event?
Right.
They had no answer for that. Yeah. They had no answer at all for that. They just kept doing what they're doing for a while until, okay, now Roman Reigns is back. We got main event again. Cool. But still, it still feels like every week the same guys on both shows are in main event. Like, how many freaking main events has Baron Corbin been in the past 2 years?
Yeah.
Too many to count.
Right.
We all know that. But and real quick, another thing I liked about the parking lot match that I mentioned in another article I did was, 2020 has been a big year for the cinematic wrestling, and there's a place for it too. Like, that Boneyard match was great. I love that. And Firefly Funhouse was entertaining for what it was, but there have been some diminishing returns since then. NXT had that parking lot street fight match with, as Adam Cole and Velveteen Dream, that was cinematic style. That is what they called it. And But this fight was, there's nothing cinematic about it except for the Santana Ortiz wearing the face paint.
Yeah,
that was it. Everything else was like, okay, this is an actual street fight.
Yeah,
this is what people are doing. Throw each other on garbage cans. That's what they do. There's no movie effects here. None of that stuff.
No, just four guys just beating the hell out of each other. That's basically what it was. But it was brutal. But I loved it. As I said, I don't think that's a surprise, and we talked about it. It's just, man, it was different, and I think that's what you want is to have stuff like that. Obviously, you can't do it every single week, but you add in those different elements. They pushed it as such. I mean, I thought they did a really good job of kind of going into it. Like, they pushed the seriousness. They pushed both these teams being very focused. They weren't playing around. And then they come out because knowing that they were going to have that type of match, and I thought that made it that much better for them for sure. But all right, let's talk about some New Japan, because the G1 is going on, and Steve, I don't know about you, but I am still feeling the bruises just from watching Ishii versus Suzuki on night one, because my goodness, that was an absolute battle.
Yeah, I'm the kind of New Japan observer. I don't watch everything because honestly, I don't have the time.
Right.
The time slot's bad for me. But there are certain people that I will check out. There are certain matches I'll watch. And if there's a match booked between Minoru Suzuki and Big Tom Ishii, I'm all over that. That's my kind of wrestling right there. They're two guys just slapping the hell out of each other, beating each other to oblivion. It's great. It's good stuff. I enjoy it. Who wouldn't like such a thing? My gosh. Just perfect. Perfect. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, those guys are great, and as you would expect, I mean, the G1's gotten off to a great start. I think a lot of people would, look at it. We knew when we looked at the blocks. I mean, that A block with those guys in there, you look at all the possible combinations, and it's just been. I mean, it's delivered to this point, and even I think you have interesting guys, in the other block as well. And I know, we talked about ROH and such, and I brought him up on this podcast, even since doing it for a couple episodes thus far, but Jeff Cobb to me is someone that is very fascinating, because I know we've seen him over the years in different promotions, and obviously promotions we've talked about. I just think he's someone that it's going to be interesting moving forward, if indeed he's with New Japan for the long haul here, and not just for this G1 climax, but kind of looking at him moving forward. I've always been interested in his skill set, and I think he's got those aspects he needs to really be someone that can fit right in with them. What are maybe your thoughts just on watching Jeff Cobb and just seeing him evolve, I guess, as a wrestler over the past several years?
To be honest, my favorite version of Jeff Cobb that I've seen, you'd have to go back to the glory days of Lucha Underground.
Yeah.
When he was known as the Monster Mentaza
Right.
and just beat the crap out of everybody inside. It was that was my favorite version of him because he was just a monster. He towered over most of the people on that roster, and of course he had he had his brother with him too, which also helped out. But as far as Cobb goes and other feds, like I've seen some good stuff with him in ROH and New Japan, and I know what a lot of people think, and kind of where I'm at as well is he's not quite there yet. Like it feels like there's just something that's not quite right there, because he'll get hyped for some of these big matches. Like I remember when him and Moxley had their first match last year. Everybody was really hyped about that, and it didn't quite live up to people's expectations. And I think he's had some other matches like that as well, but there will be a time and place for him to reach that next level, and certainly in this block where he's facing off against Okada and Ibushi and Jay White and all the Ishii and Suzuki and all these guys, Takahashi for God's sakes. You see a lot of names there where Jeff Cobb should be able to have a really good performance. And even though I didn't mention him, and I'm not a huge fan of him, I would like to see Jeff Cobb beat the living shit out of Will Ospreay. That would be great.
I think that would certainly be something, and I don't think you would be the only one that would prefer that probably at this point. But you did bring up Jay White. I want to bring him up quickly too, because he's someone that had that run in Ring of Honor too. Of course, just given where he's at, and I think it's interesting to think with Jay White, like he's still only like 27 years old. I think he's going to turn 28 this year. He's someone that it's been very interesting to watch his, I guess, character, his skill set evolve kind of from where he was several years ago to where he is now, obviously with the Bullet Club involvement and all that. But as you said, someone that kind of watches New Japan maybe casually and such. But what have you thought of just Jay White and kind of where he's at this point in his career?
I think Jay White has done a lot better than people have expected.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, I'm just not really a big fan of the whole constant Bullet Club interference kind of style.
Yeah.
Not really my deal. I know some people dig it, and he's gotten hyped, and he's won championship or two, so he's doing all right. But yeah, not especially my cup of tea.
Yeah.
Not something I've been seeking out because I tend to know how those Jay White / Bullet Club matches are going to go, and I don't really need to see it.
Yep, I think a lot of people probably think that way. Like you said, it's something where if he were to get away from that, it'd be interesting to see maybe what the presentation would be like there with him. Maybe just moving away from the Bullet Club stuff, but we'll see what happens with that. But Steve, I did add to my notes here one thing I wanted to do to before we wrapped up. We mentioned it earlier, talking about the tag team series you're doing, which you did. It went up actually today as we're recording this. The top 7 tag teams of the 2010s. But I actually want to go back to where we started this podcast, and that was with the one in the 80s, and we'll put the link to all these ones you've done. That way people can look through the ones from the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. They can read the entire series. But these teams in the 80s, man, and we talked about it earlier, and just to kind of bookend this podcast, you had the Road Warriors at number 5 on this group, but you talk about some of the other teams on there, the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, obviously Arn and Tully, the Hart Foundation, the Fantastics, and the British Bulldogs. Man, there were a lot of great teams during that era, wasn't there?
A lot of teams I left out, too.
Yeah, exactly. You could have put a lot more on there.
And I kind of found the case in a lot of the decades, or even 2010s. I mentioned that Cesaro has probably had like 5 different tag teams I could put on that list, just by himself, because he's had a lot of great guys. But especially the 1980s was that was probably still the high point of tag team wrestling, because both the WWF and the NWA had loaded divisions, just an endless amount of teams. WCW could have 2 different tag team championships, and it would make sense, because there were enough teams to make that work. Today, not so much, but it's just an insane amount of tag team wrestlers, big rosters, just a lot of good times. The Hart Foundation British Bulldogs matches, classics. Of course, Arn and Tully. Arn had a bunch of different partners he could have made it with, like Ole, Beautiful Bobby could have been on a list with him, and Bobby Eaton, Stanley. All these guys are completely interconnected too, so it's tough to keep track of all these tag teams sometimes. the fabulous ones I could put on this list. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy, just good times. And I don't know, for whatever reason, eventually, I know Eric Bischoff soured on tag teams, and Vince soured on tag teams as well. And I think Bischoff even said on a podcast like one of the reasons he preferred singles wrestling was because he had to pay less people.
Yeah.
Four you got to pay two instead of four if you do singles. That's all right. But back in the day, especially with the when WWF was swallowing everybody up, when they were buying all these, they're like expanding, buying every wrestler on the face of the earth. They had a huge roster, even bigger than today's roster, for God's sakes. And a good way to utilize all these people you're buying up was just, have them be in tag teams.
Yep, that's true. It was funny when you heard him talk about that. Like, so, well, maybe just don't want to pay him. It's a lot easier not to have to do that. But yes,
of course, WCW paid him anyway.
Yeah,
so
it didn't matter.
People
right?
Not to be there.
they're probably still paying people at this point. But yes, that was definitely the case. And then, as we said, you did have the one go up today, and everybody can check out the entire series. But the 2010s, you had the Young Bucks number one on there. I don't think that's a huge surprise, but when you kind of look at the evolution of what they've done since they've started their career, and obviously the other ones on the list. I mean, the Usos had to be on there, the Revival's on there, and then some of the others. Like it's been interesting, and you just brought it up. You're not really sure when things maybe changed with tag team wrestling, but it has been interesting to see sort of the change in dynamic. But it does feel like when you look at where we are now with some of these teams, and I think the WWE is certainly still working on getting to that point to where they have some teams that are like that outside of maybe the Usos and New Day. But when you look at a roster like AEW, obviously all the teams that they have there, there are a lot of interesting teams certainly to keep an eye on here moving forward.
Yeah, because you have, the Young Bucks, of course, Nick and Matt are two of the executive vice presidents in AEW, excuse me. And, they want people to wrestle.
Yeah.
they wanted a nice roster of tag teams that they could wrestle against. So they did a pretty good job putting it together. And it's kind of interesting that they haven't been the tag team champions there yet. And that's something that we'll be keeping an eye on. But definitely part of the revitalization of tag team wrestling. I know everybody has... the Bucks are a very divisive team. People either love their stuff or they hate it. If you're like Jim Cornette and you're stuck in 1985 or whatever. And then other people point out, you know what? People said the same stuff about Midnight Express back in the day. And Jimmy really gets mad when you mention that. Really gets mad.
Yeah.
Doesn't like that.
He's not a big fan when you compare the two. That's for sure. I think he's talked about that before. I think we've heard him actually say that. So no doubt.
Once or twice, maybe.
Yeah, maybe once or twice he's brought that up. But there you go. But Steve, man, this has been a fun conversation. As we said, we could probably talk for hours, but of course both of us are busy doing various things, and it's always just fun to get more insight because, as I said, you're someone who kind of follows a little bit of everything, and you do so much over at 4-1 Mania. I mean, you look at kind of the stuff you do. We talk about the tag team series, ROH, all the other stuff you do over there. So it's a lot of fun to catch up with you, and anything exciting you have in the works here on the way we can promote.
Well, I mean, we're going to figure out what we're going to rank next. I've run out of tag teams now, so we're going to figure out something else to do on that front. I finished the next botch column this morning. That'll be up pretty soon. Big appearance, in fact, by Trent's mom, Sue.
Yes.
Sue's on the column this week because there was a botch involving Sue. It was pretty great.
Of course, Sue. She has been a highlight without question. Of course, on the recent BTE, she was on there, and I thought, oh man, the segment she had with Dark Order was great too. So
John Silver's impersonation of Brody Lee. Oh, John Silver's got to be in Wrestler of the Year consideration just for that.
I was gonna say, put John Silver in Retribution, and I'm in. Like, just have him switch, put him over there, and maybe we got a chance at that point. We'll see.
Yeah, get John Silver, John Silver, Eric Young. That might work.
Yeah, put both those guys over there. But we didn't even talk about Impact, but I think Impact's actually been pretty enjoyable here too recently. I think it's been really fun, really. So.
That's another group that's kind of, I think they've also refocused themselves during the pandemic era and trying to figure out what they are. And they've also made some good signings based off of who WWE released.
Yeah.
And they've kind of cherry picked the ones that they wanted that maybe AEW and other people weren't quite interested in. So they made a lot of good additions, and it's a very good show on Tuesday night.
Yeah, it is. And, of course, Jeremy Thomas, we've brought it up before here on the podcast. He has his reviews on that up every Tuesday. But, yeah, that's been a very enjoyable show, too. So we're not just here to knock, the bad things. We actually talked about a lot of positive things today. And I know we had to talk about Retribution and some of the other stuff, but you have to go with what you like, and there's some things that are working, some things that aren't, but hey, that's professional wrestling. So, Steve, like I said, I really appreciate you doing this. I've always kind of listened to the podcast, even before I started doing stuff for 411, and always enjoyed your insight, and so I'm really happy to have you on.
Well, it's good to be on.
And thanks again to 411's Steve Cook for joining me here on the podcast. As always, be sure to check out Steve's work over at 411mania.com. He just has so much great stuff over there, and I would highly suggest going back through it and just checking out his entire backlog of work, because there are so many great columns, so many great reviews in there, so be sure to check that out on 411mania.com, and you can check out all the other great stuff that we have going on over there. Of course, the G1 continues. We have all of our reviews over there. Ian Hamilton, who we had on the podcast here recently, he has his reviews. Kevin's reviews are up there, all sorts of stuff. Be sure to check all that out over at 411mania.com. And as we continue to mention, the GoFundMe for Larry Zonka's family is still active, and we will put the link to that in the show notes here in the podcast. So if you've already contributed, thank you so much for doing that, and continue to share that for others maybe who have not had a chance to do that. Again, it's very appreciated, and we will continue to put that here in the show notes here on each episode of the podcast. And remember to subscribe to the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. Go over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, you name it. Just search for us on there. And if you enjoy the podcast, leave us a nice 5-star review. That just helps the show reach more people and more wrestling fans around the world. And again, we really do appreciate that. And I've really appreciated the great feedback thus far here since we have restarted the podcast. Stay safe. Thank you as always for listening, and we'll talk to you on the next episode of the 411 on Wrestling Podcast.